If you want to wake up a Chevy 305, the internet will tell you to hunt down a Junkyard 350 distributor and swap it in. That is a massive mistake that will introduce misfires right when you need power. The actual fix costs $8, takes 20 minutes, and happens inside the distributor you already have. The Chevy 305 has a reputation as an underpowered, emissions-choked disappointment, and the factory ignition calibration is genuinely terrible. But the solution isn't a junkyard swap with worn-out shaft bushings. Today we're breaking down the 40 horsepower butt dyno dilution, the real federal reason GM cracked down on these mods, and the $8 hardware fix that actually solves the problem. The 40 horsepower butt dyno dilution. Forum threads, Facebook groups, and old-school comment sections all repeat the same claim: 40 horsepower free from advancing the timing curve. Here's what timing advance actually does. Ignition timing optimization controls when the spark fires relative to piston position, ensuring the combustion event reaches peak cylinder pressure at the optimal point in the power stroke. Correcting a sluggish factory timing curve genuinely improves combustion efficiency. But timing optimizes the air-fuel charge already in the cylinder. It does not create new airflow. The 305's airflow ceiling is set by 1.72-inch intake valves, a sub-0.360-inch factory camshaft, and a restrictive exhaust. Timing cannot move those numbers. What a correct recurve genuinely delivers is improved throttle response in low-end torque. The off-idle surge that feels like 40 horsepower is real. Calling it 40 peak horsepower is not. The butt dyno is measuring throttle response and calling it output. Those are not the same thing. The federal reality of the GM ban. The story circulating in forums goes like this. A mechanic figured out the distributor trick, word spread, GM found out and issued technical service bulletins in 1983 because corporate engineers were embarrassed that a backyard mechanic outsmarted them. That framing is wrong about the motivation. GM locked down ignition timing specifications because the Clean Air Act of 1970 made tampering with factory emissions control devices a federal offense, and the distributor's vacuum advance in mechanical timing calibration were explicitly classified as emissions control equipment. When a dealership knowingly altered that calibration, they were tampering with certified emissions equipment on a federally regulated vehicle. The liability wasn't warranty exposure, it was federal fines. The factory 305 timing curve was never calibrated for performance. It was calibrated to pass an EPA certification test. Every degree of timing left on the table was left there deliberately for a regulatory reason that had nothing to do with the engine's mechanical capability. The $8 fix works precisely because the factory left so much performance on the table, not because it discovered something engineers missed, but because the engineers were solving a completely different problem. The Junkyard distributor trap. The Junkyard 350 HEI distributor swap has a legitimate engineering basis. The 350 unit was originally calibrated with lighter advance springs and a more aggressive mechanical advance curve than the emissions-strangled 305. In theory, a correctly calibrated 350 distributor in a 305 does improve the timing curve. The problem is the word correctly. HEI distributors use two shaft bushings to keep the main shaft in precise alignment. The reluctor wheel that triggers spark events maintains a specific air gap to the pickup coil, approximately 0.008 inches on a properly functioning unit. That gap is determined entirely by shaft alignment, which is entirely determined by bushing condition. On a high-mileage junkyard distributor with an unknown service history, those bushings wear. The shaft develops lateral play. At low RPM, the wobble effect is minimal. At higher RPM, the shaft is spinning faster. Wobble frequency increases, and the gap variation becomes significant. The pickup coil reads an inconsistent signal. Timing scatters. You have replaced a sluggish but consistent factory timing curve with an unstable misfiring timing curve on a part that cost you nothing and produces results that are, in many cases, worse than the unit you removed. The junkyard swap trades one problem for a less predictable problem. The correct solution doesn't require replacing the housing at all. The real $8 fix and how it makes power. Every factory HEI distributor from the mid-1970s through the late 1980s uses the same mechanical advance architecture. Under the rotor, directly on top of the distributor shaft, sits a centrifugal advance assembly. Two weighted advance arms controlled by return springs, with total advance travel set by a limit bushing. The factory 305 uses heavy springs specifically selected to delay total advance until above 4,000 RPM. That choice was made for emissions compliance, not performance. The engine spends the majority of its operating life, every acceleration from a stop, every passing maneuver, every highway on-ramp, in the RPM range where the factory curve is deliberately withholding timing. An aftermarket HEI recurve kit, Moroso, Mr. Gasket, several others, costs approximately $8. It contains lighter calibrated springs, optimized weight profiles, and advanced limit bushings in different travel lengths. Installation means removing the cap and rotor, swapping the springs and weights, selecting the correct limit bushing, and reassembling. No machining, no new housing, no junkyard sourcing. The factory heavy springs hold your timing back until 4,000 RPM. The $8 recurve kit uses lighter springs to bring total timing all in by 2,500 RPM. More cylinder pressure early equals more torque where a street car actually drives. That shaded area on the graph, the timing being withheld below 4,000 RPM, is what the butt dyno is feeling after a correct recurve. It's not 40 peak horsepower. It's the engine finally operating with full timing advance through the entire RPM band that matters for street driving. One critical note before you turn a wrench: advancing the curve too aggressively without accounting for your compression ratio, fuel octane, and engine condition produces detonation. Start with the manufacturer's recommended spring combination for a mild street 305. Verify initial timing with a timing light, typically 8 to 12 degrees BTDC on 87-octane pump gas. Drive under load and listen for detonation, the metallic pinging under hard acceleration. If you hear it, back off initial timing or move to a slightly heavier spring. The recurve kit gives you the hardware. The timing light in your ears give you the confirmation. $8, 20 minutes. The distributor that's been on the engine since the Carter administration, now calibrated for the problem you're actually trying to solve. The 305's ignition calibration was never designed to produce performance. It was designed to pass a federal EPA test, and it did exactly that, which is not the same thing as what you needed to do on a public road. The 40 horsepower claim doesn't survive the airflow math. The GM crackdown was Clean Air Act enforcement, not corporate embarrassment. The junkyard distributor introduces shaft wear that trades a sluggish curve for an unstable one. And the real fix has been in the Moroso catalog for decades, using hardware that drops directly into the distributor you already own. This is the same pattern we see with almost every classic engine myth. The actual historical trick is never the complicated one. It's always the cheap, direct solution that the forum mythology buried under 30 years of retelling. If you've recurved an HEI on a 305 or any small block application, what spring combination did you land on and what did it do to drivability? I want the specifics in the comments, and if the Federal Clean Air Act angle was new information, drop a timestamp where that landed. Subscribe for more content that goes into the actual engineering and regulatory history behind what makes these engines perform and what held them back from the factory floor. See you next time.